lot of painting of little black parts and white parts and black parts, and it's time consuming, but by time consuming I think I probably mean frustrating, because it's the hard work part rather than the thinking part. I wanted to get this bay done, though it's actually only done on this side and this side, because I'm not sure what I'm going to do about the gap problem at the back, and I'm not quite sure how. I can't do this face, this ripped away face, until I've got the whole height at least of the missing building. But I wanted to get to the stage of being able to build the bridging part, and if you've been watching these videos in a block, you will know what I've forgotten, because it was it's November now, and I think I did that first piece in February, so I can't remember why I originally made that piece so rigid. I can't remember why I started on the second floor. It was the experimenting, really, to see how it would all work. But I've sliced that in half yesterday, and then on this piece, which was originally different boxes, I've cut the internal walls away because I decided I just didn't need them. It's a little bit of weight I can get away with, and most significantly, I've got to get that curve now, and this was completely box shaped because I'd put a completely solid flat roof on it. So I've been trying to show you this with one hand. What I've done is I've made some cuts. That's the only way I can do it, to actually start to introduce a curve into the whole building to correct what I did originally. There's another one there. I'm going to have to put some wedges in there, and probably some lumps of actually something quite hard to keep it apart, and then start to fill that with my my wonderful filler. This is now 9 months old, and it's just starting to go off, but I would recommend this stuff. It's great, particularly when you mix it with a bit of PVA. Difficult to take the lid off one-handed. The important thing to make it last is not to allow it much air. So whenever I put that away, I'm always don't keep the lid off it for longer than I have to. I decant it. I always keep the original seal in there. It's just like a piece of waxed paper, and then that dead space on top I always fill with just plastic bags. It's going down a bit now. I think I need some more stuff in there, just to try to make that last by not letting it expose itself to the air for too much. But that's the next stage, is to get this into some sort of curve. I've made dents and bends in there, and then I've got to cut another piece out here, and then I've got to figure out the sort of the bridging section before I start building the balcony on. And the lower floors, and indeed the rock, all need a lot of detailing, but yeah, my mind is entirely on the third floor and what's above it at the moment. What do you see when you stand under a jetty and look up? Well, perhaps it doesn't matter, but this is going to be displayed at sort of tabletop height, and I always like to think about what children will see when they look at my art, and children or very small people or people in wheelchairs will look up and see that. And even the wondrous internet couldn't tell me. I had to actually look underneath real jettied buildings to see, and you see white because there is a layer of wattle daub actually under there, and I didn't paint it in, so now I'm having to get down underneath it and paint upwards, like Michelangelo painting the roof of the Sistine Chapel, or not quite. And then I'm going to have to go around it with black, and there'll be 2 layers of white, and some places I'm going to have to use a different paintbrush because that won't fit in there. and it's a right old pain, but it's learning as I go along. And this piece, which is the first floor bit, the other side of the guinon, it's very damaged on that side. I'm painting that in advance, so I have learnt to paint that white part in before I stick it down for the future, and it's a case of not forgetting. Too difficult, so I've had to rock it, put it on its side, and it's supported on my coat, which means if I splash any paint that's on my coat, and someone else is very, very interested to see it, and is getting his nose in everywhere, but I'm not able to paint those white patches underneath, need a second coat, and I'm just not able to do it well enough by stooping down and getting underneath, even with studio photography lights that I can reposition. It's difficult to be able to see what I'm doing, so the worry is that putting it down like that is going to put a strain on the support. It's a good job I've obviously taken the top part of the tower off, but it's a good job it's only 2 stories at the high at the moment instead of 5 or 6. It's been a full 4 or 5 days since I picked up the camera, and that's because, believe it or not, I am trying not to bore you, and that 4 or 5 days has been painting 2 coats on here, and little bits of fiddling and correcting and painting the wood, and more correcting of the actual positioning. And I couldn't, the windows in particular, because I did this floor first, I didn't have the cutouts, so I've had to carefully trace those shapes for all of those 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 windows, and make them. And I can't stand doing any more windows that are done in the horn strip way. These are the other windows at Barley Hall in York, and they're just made out of wax paper and lattice. And I thought a lot about the ways I might attempt that lattice. I thought I might draw them on the backs of some translucent paper, which is happening, sorry if this is making you dizzy, that's happening over here. I'm just attempting to paint white tissue paper that came with some shoes, this time with acrylic matte varnish. I don't think that's going to work. I think it's going to stick to the cardboard scrap there. But rather than actually construct the lattice out of teeny little bits, thin strips of card, half a millimetre thick, which I've had to cut with a scalpel, I suddenly remembered I've got these cupcake wrappers, and I bought them for a project years ago. I can't remember what it was, and that may just work. Remember that when I get up to the second floor and above, I'm getting more fantastical and less realistic, but I think that might make quite nice fillers for the windows, backed with, they'll be tiny, they'll just be at that scale, they'll just be sort of fancy shapes in the windows. I'm pointing the camera at what I'm trying to show you. There we go. I think that might work, yeah. And also slow progress due to making an iron golem is in progress out of a Playmobil person, and I've been scratch building a Zorn out of paper clips and hot glue and sand and silver foil and 3 little ball bearings, and he's got absolutely nothing to do with the sign of the Silent One, apart from the fact that he's D&D, so he might one day come erupting up through the floor. Laid low with the most horrendous cold again, which actually left me in bed for two days, and it's sort of not going away, as you can probably tell from my voice, but despite losing time again, I'm pleased with the way the windows turned out. They're going to need some stuffing. I'm going to make wadding or miniature rags or something to stuff in those little gaps. I mentioned that I was worried about catching this with my shoulder whenever I walked past, and of course I did. It's snapped off and has been repaired and now reinforced with a cocktail stick. It still needs painting, and I decided that I started thinking about the balcony. Something clicked that I like the idea of the balcony going around and being something you needed to use. So to come and visit this area of the building, you have to emerge from here and go all the way along the rickety balcony and round the corner to go in again. That's something that's sort of indicative of fantasy maze-like buildings. It goes with the idea of the only way you can get into that section will be to go up and across and down. There's deliberately no doors to here, but that meant I needed an extra door, and that's something that you see with real timber framed buildings of a good vintage. You actually can sort of read the history. So here there was a nice symmetrical pair of curves, and a door has had to be bodged into that, which is attractive. I like the way that turned out. And I spent last night, it took a ridiculous amount of time cutting these, because to do that balcony to go all the way round there, there's going to need to be 40 or more than 40 of these lintel pieces. This tool is proving really inadequate now. You can see I've propped it with a peg. That's making it better. But now an inadequate tool is sometimes an advantage with this kind of work, because if I had a Proxxon hot wire table, then more likely to all be regular, because I was struggling with them. They're all different. They've all got different markings and they've all got different dimensions, which is going to help me make my balcony rickety. And then I've started thinking ahead to the 4th floor, and I thought, well, I can't remember what I was going to do for the 4th floor. Oh, that's the 3rd floor, or the 4th story. I'll look back at my plan. First time I've looked at it in weeks, and then you can see when I did the plan I was clueless about the 4th story. So I may have to come up with an idea or cut it out. But tonight I'm going to do something just a little bit more free. Yes, of course, the two ripped away ends have still got a lot of thought. Going back to work on the rock a little bit, and where I put those layers of foam core, you can still see I've still got steps, and in places I've got sort of very regular corners. So just that interface between the rock and the building needs a bit of trimming. So I bought the Dremel tool in. It is the most wonderful tool ever. Don't buy a cheap substitute. Buy a proper Dremel. I had a cheap substitute for years and didn't know what I was missing. And I'm just going to play with this for a bit and make a terrible mess and start chunking away and breaking up anything that looks a bit regular and steps. I'm going to hack at it with this and with the sanding bits, and going to have a messy, noisy, dusty free-for-all. Two days before Christmas, and I'm pretty much going to be stuck at home for the next week, obliged to be here and be my charming, entertaining self. But it's middle of the night and they've gone to bed, so I can try to do some of the things that I've preserved for these moments. And I'm going to try and do the other doors, because they're little bits that I was able to bring home with me, but I'm sure I won't have everything I need. Now, I don't have a Proxxon hot wire cutter, but I do have a Proxxon, I don't know what its proper name is, but it's a miniature table saw, and I've had it a couple of years or more. I've not used it very often. The trouble I always had with it was, as soon as I start using it, this safety cage actually filled up with sawdust, and I can see what was happening. I'd never got around before to actually rigging it up to a vacuum cleaner, and the moment I did that, which was this time of use, because it's normally kept packed away in its box, problem was solved. So I wish I'd have known that before. It's not really a miniature tool when you've got to rig it up to the domestic vacuum cleaner, and suddenly you're like they call them shop vacs when they're used like that, don't they? It's very noisy when both of them are on. Does ruin the meditative quality of work, but it's enabled me to get on with miniature carpentry, which is very satisfying. And the main door is going to be based on the doors at Chepstow Castle, which I visited 10 years ago or so, and I think they're absolutely my favourite door in the whole world. It's just extraordinary. Huge, great big castle door, and I think it dates to the 12th or 13th century, so it's one of the oldest doors in Britain. And that's just been a case of carving up the tongue depressors, which I said were made of pine earlier, but it's harder than pine. I think they may be maybe birchwood, and then assembling. There's more work to do on this. I noticed that the pegs that do those overlap joints in the centre of each crossover there, that you can actually see the pegs, which is a decorative feature. They've been left slightly proud before the door was, messed about and mashed about over the subsequent centuries. The original door would not have been as sort of odd and botched as it was later, but the original lattice work has been made to look decorative by leaving the pegs slightly proud. So that my next job will be to using the Dremel on its pillar drill stand, and having just measured the girth of a cocktail stick with another absolutely essential thing that you should have, which is a drill gauge, ever so cheap, and another thing that I didn't have for years and years and years, and thought, I ought to get one of those drill gauge things, and it cost £2.65 on Amazon, and it's wonderful, and it's told me immediately, without having to muck about for ages and guesstimate, that my cocktail stick is just a little bit tight in the 2mm hole, so I can select a 2mm drill and make holes to embed the wooden pegs